The sharp, cold wind of New York City nipped at Ella Morgan's cheeks as she hustled down Fifth Avenue, clutching a paper bag of homemade cookies against her chest. Her sneakers slapped the sidewalk, and her worn jeans brushed against her legs. She smelled faintly of the cinnamon she had been baking with all afternoon at the community center. Her hair, usually tucked neatly behind her ears, had escaped into wild, chestnut-colored strands thanks to the wind. She caught her reflection in a glass storefront window and smiled sheepishly. Not exactly Manhattan chic, she thought, but she didn't mind. She had just spent the day laughing with kids, handing out warm meals, and listening to stories from people who had almost nothing. It filled her heart far more than any designer dress ever could. As she neared La Rue de Lumière, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, Ella's stomach fluttered with excitement. Daniel had made last-minute plans to meet her here, a rare treat, considering how busy he usually was. They hadn't had a real date night in weeks. The restaurant gleamed like a jewel between two gray buildings. Crystal chandeliers shone through floor-to-ceiling windows. Waiters in black tuxedos floated between gleaming tables topped with white linens and candlelight. Guests dressed in sleek suits and shimmering gowns sipped wine like it was their birthright. Ella tugged at the hem of her sweater, which was comfortable but several years out of fashion, and stepped inside. The moment she crossed the threshold, the room's temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Conversation dimmed. Heads turned. A woman in a sleek black dress and sharp heels, holding a gleaming tablet, strode toward Ella. Her mouth twisted into a tight, polite smile. "Good evening," the woman said coolly. Her name tag read Victoria. "May I help you?" Ella returned a warm smile. "Hi. I'm meeting someone. Daniel Morgan. He should have a reservation under his name." Victoria's eyes flicked over Ella's sweater, her scuffed sneakers, the paper bag in her hands. Her expression didn't change, but something cold crept into her voice. "I'm afraid this establishment has a very strict dress code," she said, stepping subtly between Ella and the dining room. "Our guests expect a certain level of presentation." Ella flushed, suddenly aware of every crease in her jeans, every stray hair curling against her face. "I understand," she said, keeping her voice gentle. "But my husband should be here any minute. He made a reservation." "I'm going to have to ask you to leave," Victoria interrupted, her voice louder now, cutting through the room. "This is not appropriate. Please do not cause a disturbance." A few guests nearby chuckled into their wine glasses. One man muttered, "Some people have no shame." Ella's hands tightened around the paper bag. She opened her mouth to protest, but then thought better of it. Causing a scene would only make things worse. She nodded stiffly and turned toward the door, cheeks burning. Outside, the city lights blurred as tears stung the corners of her eyes. She drew a deep breath, trying to summon the calm she had always prided herself on. Behind her, the restaurant's heavy glass doors swung open again. "Hey!" came a familiar warm voice. "Sorry I'm late." Ella turned. There was Daniel, casually handsome in dark jeans and a gray wool coat, his brown hair tousled by the wind. He looked at her with concern, instantly sensing something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, stepping closer. Ella opened her mouth to answer, but behind him, Victoria appeared in the doorway, glaring. "Sir," Victoria said sharply, "I must ask you both to leave immediately." Daniel blinked in surprise, then looked at Ella, then back at Victoria. And then, very quietly, he smiled. The sidewalk buzzed with life, taxis honking, tourists snapping photos, but all Ella could hear was the pounding of her own heart. Daniel stood between her and Victoria, his easygoing face darkening ever so slightly as he took in the situation. Victoria crossed her arms, tablet clutched tightly against her chest like a shield. "I don't know what scam you're trying to pull," she said, voice dripping with disdain, "but we cater to paying clientele. Not people like you." Ella flinched. Daniel's jaw tightened. "People like us?" he repeated quietly, his voice carrying a sharpness that made Victoria hesitate. Victoria rolled her eyes, clearly growing impatient. "Sir, please, you're causing a scene. I suggest you leave before I call security." Ella tugged at Daniel's sleeve, whispering, "It's not worth it. Let's just go." But Daniel didn't budge. Instead, he cocked his head at Victoria, studying her like a puzzle he had just realized was missing a piece. "Are you the manager here?" he asked. "General manager," she corrected proudly. Victoria Lang. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. Well, Victoria, I think there's been a little misunderstanding. I don't misunderstand appearances, Victoria snapped, her mask of civility starting to crack. We have standards. You clearly don't meet them. Around them, a few patrons had drifted closer to the windows, curious. Inside the restaurant, waiters whispered behind polished countertops, and the host stand stood deserted. Ella hated attention, hated conflict, but even she could feel something in the air shifting. A coil tightening. Daniel stepped back and slipped his hand into his coat pocket. From it, he pulled out a slim, worn leather wallet. He flipped it open, not to show a black card or a flashing badge, but a simple unassuming business card. He held it up to Victoria, letting her read it. Daniel Morgan, founder and owner, Lumiere Group Holdings. Victoria's face drained of color. Her mouth opened, then closed. Inside the restaurant, someone gasped audibly. Ella swallowed hard, feeling a strange swirl of emotions. Part of her wanted to disappear. Part of her wanted to laugh. Daniel smiled, a smile that was kind, but unmistakably edged with steel. I suppose, he said, his voice calm, that means I do meet your standards. Victoria sputtered, the tablet nearly slipping from her hands. I didn't know she stammered. Ella watched her with a curious detachment, feeling like a ghost hovering just above the scene. Daniel glanced at Ella, his eyes softening immediately. He stepped closer to her and offered his arm. Shall we? He asked, like a gentleman inviting his lady to a grand ball. Ella hesitated, just a second, then slipped her hand through the crook of his arm. Together they turned and walked past Victoria, through the grand entrance of La Rue de Lumière, into the glittering restaurant where heads now turned not in mockery, but in stunned silence. The atmosphere inside La Rue de Lumière shifted like a tide. A low murmur rippled across the tables, glasses paused midair, forks hovering inches from plates. Patrons leaned toward one another, whispering behind manicured hands. Ella felt every pair of eyes burning into her as she and Daniel moved through the restaurant. Her worn sneakers squeaked softly against the marble floor. She could smell the buttery richness of truffle risotto, the smoky perfume of grilled lamb, the sharp tang of fine wine, but all of it seemed distant, dulled by the drum of blood in her ears. Daniel led her to a corner table by the window, a place of honor, away from the crush of noise but commanding a view of the entire room. A waiter, a young man whose hands trembled slightly as he clutched two menus, rushed over. Good evening, Mr. Morgan, Mrs. Morgan, he stammered. It's an honor to have you. May I offer you some champagne to start? Daniel nodded politely. 2 glasses, please. The waiter bobbed his head and fled, almost tripping over his own feet. Ella sank into the velvet seat, her heart thudding. She stared at the white tablecloth, tracing invisible patterns with her finger. Daniel, she said, her voice low. We didn't have to stay. He smiled gently at her across the table, a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Of course we did. I don't want to make a scene, she whispered. You didn't, he said. His voice was steady, comforting. They did. Ella bit her lip. A small part of her wanted to leave, run out into the city night where nobody knew her, where nobody cared what she wore or how she looked. But another part, a part that had spent years believing in kindness, in standing firm, wanted to stay exactly where she was. The champagne arrived with dizzying speed, 2 crystal flutes fizzing with gold. The waiter bowed as if before royalty. As Ella sipped, Daniel leaned back in his chair, surveying the restaurant with a curious, almost amused expression. You know, he said casually, when I bought this place, I swore I'd leave it alone. Let it be about the food, the experience, not the noise. He tapped his fingers lightly on the table. Seems I might have made a mistake. Ella smiled faintly over her glass. It's a beautiful place, she said. It's the people who make it ugly. Daniel's eyes warmed with pride. Exactly. Across the room, Victoria hovered near the host stand, pale and shaking. Every few seconds she glanced over at them, her mouth working silently as if trying to form a plan. Ella watched her for a moment, feeling a tug of unexpected pity. Maybe she's just afraid, Ella said softly. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Afraid of what? Treating people like human beings. Ella shrugged. Sometimes fear makes people ugly. Makes them think respect is something you earn by looking the part. Daniel studied her, then set down his glass with a soft clink. You always see the good in people, he said. Even when they don't deserve it. Ella smiled sadly. Maybe that's why we work. Daniel reached across the table and took her hand, squeezing it gently. In that moment, the golden light of the chandeliers seemed warmer. The heavy silence of the room lifted just a little. They were no longer outcasts at the mercy of judgment. They were something stronger, a quiet, unshakable force. The steak knives clinked and wine glasses chimed, but an undercurrent of discomfort ran through the dining room like a draft. The restaurant, normally buzzing with effortless chatter and clinking silverware, now throbbed with awkward, heavy silence. Victoria smoothed her dress with trembling hands and took a deep breath. She squared her shoulders, forcing a brittle smile onto her lips, and approached Ella and Daniel's table like a soldier walking to the gallows. Ella watched her come, heart thudding with a mix of dread and something that almost, felt like sympathy. Victoria stopped at the edge of the table and cleared her throat, her voice low but quivering. Mr. and Mrs. Morgan, she began, I want to extend my deepest apologies for the unfortunate misunderstanding earlier. Ella looked up at her, not saying anything. Daniel sat back in his chair, arms folded, giving Victoria no help, no reprieve. Victoria pressed on, words spilling faster now, as though if she stopped, she might lose her nerve altogether. Our policy is to maintain the highest standards, she said, her eyes flicking from Daniel's impassive face to Ella's calm one. However, I understand now that my actions were inappropriate, and I deeply regret any offense I may have caused. Ella tilted her head slightly, studying the woman. Beneath the slick apology, she caught flashes of real fear. Fear of losing her prestigious job, fear of the social ruin that could follow. Still, something was missing. Ella set down her fork carefully and looked Victoria in the eye. Are you sorry because you treated someone badly, she asked, voice soft but steady, or because you found out who we are? The question hung in the air, heavy and sharp as a guillotine blade. Victoria's mouth opened, and for a moment, raw panic flickered in her eyes. She closed her mouth again, swallowing visibly. She whispered, I think, maybe both. Ella held her gaze a moment longer, then nodded slowly. Thank you for your honesty, she said. Victoria looked stunned, as if she had been bracing for a slap and received a gentle hand instead. Daniel spoke next, his voice calm but cold. This restaurant was built on excellence, he said. But somewhere along the way, it seems a few people forgot that excellence isn't just about appearances. It's about how you treat every single soul who walks through that door. He let that settle. Around them, diners pretended not to listen, but not a single fork moved, not a single glass tilted. Daniel leaned in slightly. Consider this your official warning, he said. But more importantly, consider this your wake-up call. Victoria nodded, biting her lip to keep from crying. We're all human, Ella added softly. Remember that. Victoria dipped into a shaky curtsy, murmured a thank you, and retreated, heels clicking unevenly across the marble floor. Ella watched her go, feeling not triumph, but a strange quiet sadness. She picked up her glass again and clinked it lightly against Daniel's. To second chances, she said. Daniel smiled, warmth returning to his eyes. To second chances, he echoed. Outside, the first soft flakes of snow began to fall, dusting the hard edges of the city in white. Later that night, the restaurant buzzed back to life, but something had shifted. The laughter was less shrill, the glances less cutting. It was as if the walls themselves had absorbed the lesson whispered between linen tablecloths and crystal glasses. Ella and Daniel lingered over coffee, letting the warm bitterness soothe the aftertaste of the evening's tension. Victoria had disappeared from sight, no doubt retreating to her office, but Ella couldn't stop thinking about her, the brittle pride, the desperate fear. She stirred her coffee slowly, watching the cream bloom into soft clouds. Daniel tapped his finger lightly on the table. I've been thinking, he said. Ella smiled, setting her spoon down. That usually means trouble. He chuckled. Maybe. But maybe not tonight. He leaned forward, his voice dropping so that only she could hear him. Instead of firing her outright, he said, what if we gave her a chance to really change? Ella's eyebrows lifted. You're serious? Daniel nodded. You said it yourself. Fear makes people ugly. Maybe she just needs a new kind of fear, Or better yet, a new kind of hope. Ella tilted her head, intrigued. What did you have in mind? Daniel's lips quirked into a sly smile. 6 months, he said. Working at the community center. With you. Ella blinked, then laughed, the sound ringing like a bell in the warm air. You want Victoria Lang, queen of high society, handing out soup and folding clothes at the shelter? Daniel shrugged, playful but firm. Call it empathy training. Ella covered her mouth, trying not to laugh too loudly. The image was almost too much. But only if she agrees, he added. She needs to want it. Ella sobered slightly, nodding. We can't force kindness. It has to come from inside. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the idea hanging between them like a spark catching dry tinder. Then Daniel pushed back his chair and stood, offering Ella his hand. Come on, he said. Let's make her an offer. Ella hesitated, glancing around the restaurant. A few diners glanced away quickly, pretending not to stare. She took his hand anyway. Together, they crossed the gleaming floor toward the back, where Victoria had vanished. The air grew thicker, the clatter of the dining room fading behind them. They stopped before a sleek glass door labeled Management. Daniel knocked once, sharply. Inside, there was a rustle of papers, a quick, panicked intake of breath. Then Victoria's shaky voice. Come in. Daniel turned the handle and stepped aside, letting Ella go first. The office was small and cold, all steel and leather and glass. Victoria sat behind a black desk, dabbing at her eyes with a crumpled tissue. She looked up as they entered, stiffening like a statue caught moving. Ella offered a small, kind smile. We have a proposal for you, she said. Victoria blinked, wary. Daniel stepped beside Ella, crossing his arms. 6 months, he said. Working with the community Ella helps run. Volunteering. Learning. Victoria's mouth fell open slightly. No title, Daniel added. No black tie galas. Just real work. Real people. If you want to stay here, Ella said gently, you have to show that you understand what it means to truly serve. Victoria stared at them, color slowly returning to her cheeks. And if I refuse? She asked in a whisper. Daniel's voice was calm. Then you'll resign. Tonight. Silence stretched between them. Ella watched her carefully. Would she cling to pride? Or reach for something more? Victoria's hands twisted the tissue until it shredded between her fingers. Her face crumpled for a split second, a flash of something real. I'll do it, she whispered. Ella felt something unclench in her chest. Relief. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, people could change. Snow thickened outside the restaurant, dusting the streets with a soft, silver hush. Inside the glass-walled office, the air felt heavy with the weight of everything unspoken. Victoria rose from her chair, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. She looked much smaller now, stripped of the armor she'd worn so proudly just hours ago. Ella offered her a card, simple, white, with a hand-drawn logo of a tree branching into dozens of smaller roots. The Haven Community Center. Where everyone grows. Victoria took it gingerly, as though it might burn her fingers. We'll expect you tomorrow morning, Ella said kindly. 8 sharp. Victoria nodded mutely. She looked as if she wanted to say something. An apology, a protest, maybe even a thank you, but the words jammed up in her throat. Ella didn't press her. Sometimes growth didn't start with speeches. Sometimes it started with quiet, broken acceptance. Daniel opened the office door, and Ella followed him out into the restaurant once more. By now, the patrons had gone back to their meals, the earlier tension fading like mist. The chandeliers overhead still cast their honeyed light. The waiters bustled quietly, the clink of cutlery blending into a low hum of conversation. But beneath it all, something was different. A little softer. A little more real. They stepped back out into the night. The snow caught in Ella's hair, painting it silver. Daniel shrugged off his coat and draped it around her shoulders before she could protest. You were incredible tonight, he said, his voice low and warm against the sharp air. Ella smiled up at him, tugging the coat closer. You didn't do too badly yourself, Mr. Billionaire. He laughed, the sound rich and easy. I'm just the muscle, he said. You're the heart. They walked hand in hand down the glowing sidewalk, their footprints blending into the fresh-fallen snow behind them. Ella felt lighter with every step. Not because Victoria had been humbled. Not because she and Daniel had proven anything to anyone. But because tonight had reminded her of something she'd always believed deep down. Power wasn't about wealth or status. It was about kindness. It was about standing firm without hardening your heart. They turned a corner, the restaurant fading behind them, and melted into the wide, sparkling city. Morning broke cold and brilliant over the city. The sun splintered across rooftops glazed with ice, and the air was sharp enough to bite. At the Haven Community Center, Ella zipped up her worn green jacket and pulled open the heavy front doors. Inside, the warmth hit her like a hug, the smell of coffee, the low murmur of volunteers setting up tables, the clatter of crates filled with donated clothes. She smiled, breathing it all in. This place, with its scuffed floors and faded posters and bursting shelves, was more precious to her than any gleaming skyscraper. Today, it would become someone else's second chance. Victoria arrived precisely at 8 a.m. Ella spotted her standing awkwardly in the lobby, wrapped in an expensive coat far too thin for the weather, clutching a leather purse like a lifeline. Her face was carefully blank, but her eyes darted nervously around the busy room. Ella crossed the space and offered a warm, steady smile. "Welcome," she said. Victoria nodded stiffly. Where should I start?" Ella handed her a clipboard. "Today's schedule. We're sorting food donations and preparing care packages for the shelter downtown." Victoria took the clipboard as if it weighed 100 pounds. Ella led her to a long folding table where volunteers buzzed with quiet energy. Teenagers with purple hair, grandmothers in old sneakers, middle-aged men with calloused hands, all laughing and working shoulder to shoulder. "Morning," a grinning woman with frizzy hair called out. "You knew." Victoria hesitated, the muscles in her face fighting a battle. Then stiffly she said, "Yes. I'm here to help." The woman tossed her a pair of gloves and a smile. "Grab a box, hon. We've got a mountain to climb." For the next few hours, Victoria sorted canned goods, folded clothes, and packed winter kits with heavy gloved hands. At first, she worked like a robot. Stiff, silent, her nose wrinkling every time she brushed against something dusty. But slowly, the center began to chip away at her. A little boy handed her a drawing of a lopsided Christmas tree, grinning up at her with missing teeth. An old man in a battered coat thanked her for finding a scarf that was just his color. A volunteer offered her a slice of greasy, delicious pizza, laughing when she wiped the sauce clumsily from her chin. By midday, Victoria's designer coat had been shoved into a corner, and she was kneeling on the floor, laughing breathlessly as she wrestled an overstuffed box of diapers into a closet. Ella watched from across the room, a soft smile blooming on her face. There was still pride in Victoria's posture, still a brittleness to her movements, but also something new. Something lighter. She wasn't fixed yet. But she was trying. And that, Ella thought, was all anyone could ask for. 2 months later, spring crept shyly into the city. The sidewalks shed their icy coats, the bare trees pushed out tiny green fists, and the air smelled of wet earth and new beginnings. At La Rue de Lumière, the chandeliers still glittered, and the wine still flowed, but the soul of the place had shifted. There was laughter now that wasn't laced with cruelty, and smiles that reached the eyes. Ella and Daniel sat once again by the window, a soft tradition they had built without ever speaking about it. Tonight, though, the table felt fuller, richer, threaded through with meaning. Victoria stood before them, holding a simple envelope in her hands. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, no longer rigid but easy, a few strands escaping to soften her face. She wore no jewelry except a small silver bracelet, a gift from one of the children at the shelter, made of beads and string. "I wanted to thank you," she said, voice clear but thick with emotion, "for giving me the chance to see the world differently. To see myself differently." Ella's eyes softened. She saw it now, not just the apology, but real change. A humbling, a healing. Victoria handed the envelope to Daniel. He opened it and smiled. Inside was a handwritten letter of resignation. Not forced, not bitter. Voluntary. "I want to find my own way now," Victoria said. "Somewhere I can make a difference. Maybe something smaller, messier. Something real." Daniel stood and offered his hand. She shook it firmly, with a real grateful smile. Ella rose too, and to her surprise, Victoria pulled her into a quick, fierce hug. Thank you, Victoria whispered into her ear. For seeing someone worth saving, even when I didn't. When Victoria left the restaurant that night, she didn't sweep out like royalty. She slipped into the cool spring air like everyone else, walking alone but standing taller than Ella had ever seen her. Ella and Daniel sat back down, a comfortable hush settling between them. You think she'll be okay? Daniel asked, watching her disappear down the street. Ella smiled, a deep warm smile that lit up her whole face. I think she's just getting started, she said. Daniel reached across the table and took her hand, squeezing it gently. Outside the window, the city buzzed and bloomed, endless and alive. And inside the restaurant where judgment had once reigned, something better had taken root. Something quiet, patient and fiercely, stubbornly good. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the name. It was about hearts, messy, complicated, beautiful, choosing to open instead of harden. And that, Ella thought as she squeezed Daniel's hand back, was a fortune greater than any riches. The story teaches that judging others by their appearance leads only to shame and missed opportunities for real connection. Kindness and patience can transform even the hardest hearts when given a chance. Power and influence are most meaningful when used to lift others up, not to push them down. Redemption is possible for those who are willing to confront their flaws, accept help, and work toward becoming better. Integrity and compassion are richer and more enduring than any fortune or title. At its heart, the story is a reminder that human dignity belongs to everyone, and that offering grace, even when wronged, can lead to deeper healing for both the giver and the receiver.